"This looks like junk from a nursing home," my daughter-in-law said, smirking as she tossed my gift into the fire. I watched the flames consume it while my own son just stood there, refusing to meet my eyes. But she forgot that the most beautiful book covers can hide the ugliest stories. And in that moment, she didn't just burn a gift, she handed me the match to burn down her entire kingdom of lies. This is the story of how a retired librarian wrote the final chapter. But stories rarely start with fire. Mine began with ice. The story didn't start with fire, it started with ice. A single phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. The sound was sharp in the quiet of my Boston home. It was Jennifer, my daughter-in-law. "This ski trip just isn't for old people, Lorraine," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that couldn't hide its cold edge. My eyes drifted to the plane ticket I'd bought for myself weeks ago, a folded piece of hope sitting on my desk. It was meant to be a surprise, a chance to finally make new memories with my only son and his family. Now it was just expensive paper. I could hear Ben in the background, a nervous cough, a cleared throat, silence. He just let it happen. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own life? The ticket sat there, a lonely island on a sea of polished wood. But I didn't know then. That was only the first scratch. That scratch didn't appear overnight. It was the result of 1,000 tiny cuts, inflicted so quietly, so politely, you almost convince yourself you're not bleeding. For years, I had been convincing myself. The phone call was just the moment I finally had to look down and see the blood on my hands. After I hung up, the silence in my Boston home felt heavier than usual, thick with unspoken words and broken promises. I walked into my library, my sanctuary, a room built from a lifetime of loving words. The air smelled of old paper and leather, a scent that had always meant comfort. Today, it smelled only of the past. My fingers, thin and pale against the dark wood of the shelves, traced the silver frame of an old photograph. It was Ben, my Ben, age 10. He was standing on the steps of the Boston Public Library, clutching his very first library card like it was a winning lottery ticket. He wore a coat that was 2 sizes too big, a hand-me-down from a neighbor, but his smile was enormous, a proud, gap-toothed grin that could have lit up the entire city. I remembered the echo of his laughter in the vast, quiet halls, a sound so pure and full of joy, it felt like a promise of a happy life. We were a team then, a fortress of 2 against a world that had taken his father too soon. Every extra shift I worked, every treasured first edition classic I quietly sold to a collector, was a stone laid in the foundation of his future. It was a sacrifice he never knew about, a secret I was happy to keep. I thought I was giving him the world. I didn't know I was just preparing him for her. Jennifer arrived in our lives like a summer storm, bright, loud, and rearranging everything she touched with a dazzling, confident force. At first I was charmed. Who wouldn't be? She had a laugh that filled every room and a way of looking at my son that made me believe he had finally found his forever. But storms, no matter how beautiful, can be destructive. The changes were subtle at first. She didn't ask. She informed. She didn't suggest. She decided. The first Thanksgiving she was with us, she arrived with a store-bought pecan pie. "Oh, Lorraine," she'd said, pushing my homemade apple pie to the back of the counter. "Your classics are lovely, but we have to try something a little more modern, don't we?" Ben, who had loved my apple pie since he could walk, just smiled weakly and agreed. And my son, my once brilliant and confident Ben, he simply began to shrink. It happened so gradually, I almost missed it. He stopped calling to debate politics. He stopped arguing about his favorite baseball team. He started answering her questions with a quick, clipped nod, agreeing with a quiet, "Yes, dear," obeying with a sigh he thought I couldn't hear. The man who once filled a room with his presence now seemed dedicated to taking up as little space as possible. For years, I told myself that my silence was a form of grace, a dignified choice to keep the peace for the sake of my son's happiness. I believed that love meant stepping back, making room, and never, ever making waves. I was wrong. It wasn't grace. It was surrender. Every time I held my tongue, I was handing her another piece of my son, another piece of my family. Her kindness always had an audience. I remember her walking through this very library last month, trailing a perfectly manicured finger across the spines of books she would never read. She paused in front of the oldest, most worn section of the shelf, where I keep the things that matter most. She picked up my late husband's leather-bound diary, its cover softened by the passage of time, his initials faintly embossed in gold. It held the last words he ever wrote. She weighed it in her hand, tapped its cover with a fingernail, set it down with a soft thud. "Just another old thing," she'd sighed, a flicker of genuine boredom in her eyes before she replaced it with her perfect, polite smile. She had no idea what was written inside. I should have understood then. A person who dismisses the past is someone who is actively trying to erase it. I just didn't realize she was also planning to erase my future. That realization came on Christmas Eve, a night draped in fake tinsel and even faker smiles. Their home didn't feel like a home. It felt like a stage set. Every ornament on the tree was perfectly placed, every candle scented with expensive pine, a sterile perfection that left no room for warmth. I arrived carrying the only two things I knew how to give: tradition and love. In one hand, I held a heavy roasting pan with the turkey I'd spent 2 days preparing, its rich aroma a ghost of Christmases past. In the other, a small, softly wrapped gift for my granddaughter, Lily. The evening was a performance of strained pleasantries. Jennifer floated through the room, a perfect hostess in a silk dress, her laughter like the clinking of ice in an empty glass. Ben shadowed her, refilling drinks, his movements stiff and rehearsed. He gave me a quick, fleeting smile when he saw the turkey, a flicker of the boy he used to be, and for a foolish moment, I felt a spark of hope. The gift exchange was her grand finale. Piles of glossy boxes were opened to polite oohs and ahs. When the commotion died down, I finally brought out my small, humble gift for Lily. Her eyes lit up as she tore away the simple paper. It was a teddy bear, sewn by my own hands from a piece of her father's old flannel shirt, with mismatched buttons for eyes. It was imperfect. It was real. Lily reached for it with a squeal of delight, but Jennifer was faster. She plucked it from the air, her perfectly manicured fingers holding it by one ear as if it were contaminated. "This looks like old junk from a nursing home," she announced, her voice clear and bright, cutting through the quiet hum of the party. She held it up for everyone to see. She turned. She walked. She tossed it into the fireplace. The world went silent. The cheerful carolers on the radio faded into nothing. The polite chatter of the guests dissolved. I didn't see the perfectly decorated tree or the expensive champagne. I only saw the flames. The soft fabric of the bear hesitated for a moment, then caught fire with a soft whoosh. I watched its button eyes melt and drip like dark tears. I watched the careful stitching on its smile come undone. I watched it curl, blacken, and turn to ash. But the fire wasn't what broke me. It was the silence that followed. I finally tore my eyes from the flames and looked at my son, the boy I had raised to be a good man, the one I had sacrificed everything I had to build a life for. Ben just stared at his expensive Italian shoes. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't even seem to breathe. In that deafening silence, he made his choice. He chose his wife's casual cruelty over his mother's heart. He chose this cold, perfect house over the home we once had. A heart doesn't break from a shout. It breaks from the silence. I don't remember saying goodbye. I just remember the cold winter air hitting my face as I walked out the front door, leaving the warmth of the fire and the coldness of my family behind me. Later that night, long after the guests had gone home and the performance was over, they left for a midnight service. I had offered to clean up. It was a pretense. I needed to be alone in the wreckage. I gathered empty glasses and crumpled napkins, the remnants of a happiness I wasn't part of. As I reached into the kitchen trash can, my fingers brushed against a stiff piece of paper tucked beneath a pile of discarded food. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from a high-end jewelry store downtown, Tiffany & Company. The item was a starlight diamond tennis bracelet. The price made my breath catch in my throat, and the date was from just last week, the same week Jennifer had complained to Ben on the phone about how strapped for cash they were. A diamond bracelet. This wasn't a gift for Lily, and it certainly wasn't a gift for Ben. So who was it for? The question of the diamond bracelet hung in the air of my quiet house for a week. It was a loose thread in the perfectly woven fabric of my daughter-in-law's life, and I, a librarian, have a professional intolerance for loose threads. I resisted the urge to pull on it. I waited. I knew that eventually the fabric would unravel on its own. The call came the following Saturday. Jennifer's voice was back to its usual syrupy sweetness, laced with a manufactured urgency. She and Ben had a last-minute business opportunity in New York, a weekend conference they simply couldn't miss. Could I possibly watch the children? It would be such a lifesaver. I knew she was lying. The conference was a fiction, the business a facade. But the woman who answered the phone was not the same one who had left their house in tears on Christmas Eve. That woman was gone, burned away with the ashes of a handmade gift. "Of course, Jennifer," I said, my voice even and calm. "I'd be happy to." An hour later, I was in their cold, minimalist house, a place that always felt more like a showroom than a home. The children were quiet, withdrawn, moving around their own space like polite little ghosts. Jennifer had left a list of instructions on the marble countertop, a 3-page document detailing everything from their approved snack list to their mandated screen time. Control, even from a distance. While the children were occupied with a movie, I began the simple, domestic task she'd asked me to do: put away their clean laundry. I went into the guest room, a space that was always kept perfectly, unnervingly clean. As I placed a stack of Lily's neatly folded sweaters on the top shelf of the closet, my fingers brushed against something hard and unfamiliar, buried deep beneath a pile of old cashmere. It wasn't a box. It was a phone, an old, cheap, prepaid model, a burner. The kind of phone someone uses when they have conversations they don't want anyone else to find. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't even tremble. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. For 35 years, I had organized stories, cataloged facts, and respected the sanctity of a closed book. But this book was left open in my house, and I was about to read every single page. I sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed. I took a breath. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, no password required. And there it was, her second life, laid bare in glowing pixels. The first thing I opened was her messages, a long thread with a man saved only as D. There were hotel reservations, flight confirmations to the Cayman Islands, and then a photo. A woman's wrist, slender and tan, adorned with the starlight diamond tennis bracelet. The caption underneath it read, "It looks so much better on you." So, the question was answered. But that was only chapter 1. I navigated to her photo gallery. It wasn't filled with pictures of her children. It was a library of financial documents, screenshots of wire transfers, moving tens of thousands of dollars at a time from Ben's business accounts into an offshore entity, spreadsheets meticulously tracking my son's assets, his investments, his inheritance. It was a 2-year campaign of systematic looting, cold and calculated. Then finally, I found the Notes app. There was a single file dated the day before Christmas. It was a draft, a divorce petition. It painted my son, Ben, as an emotionally unstable and financially irresponsible husband, making him solely responsible for the very debts she had created. The petition cited his erratic behavior as the reason she needed to secure full custody of the children and sole ownership of their remaining assets for their protection. This wasn't a betrayal. This was an assassination. The grief I felt on Christmas Eve was gone. Grief is for loss. This was a declaration of war. My mind, the librarian's mind, began to work. I saw the evidence. I classified the crime. I planned my response. I spent the next hour meticulously transferring every file, every message, every photo to a secure cloud drive. I backed it up twice. Then I deleted the transfer logs from the phone's memory, wiped my fingerprints from the screen, and placed it back in its hiding place, nestled deep beneath the sweaters, exactly as I had found it, leaving no trace. When I walked out of that house and back into my own quiet library, the air felt different. The weight of sadness had been replaced by the heavy, solid certainty of purpose. I sat down at my late husband's old oak desk, the surface cool beneath my hands. I closed the laptop containing her entire secret life. I set it aside, and then I reached for my husband's diary. My husband was a man of quiet strength and careful planning. He was a historian, a man who believed that the past held all the answers to the future if you only knew where to look. I ran my fingers over the worn leather of his diary, the cover soft as a prayer. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for a weapon. I opened it to the first page. His familiar, elegant handwriting filled the yellowed paper. It wasn't a diary entry. It was a note, addressed to me. "My dearest Lorraine," it began, "if you are reading this and the world has grown complicated, remember that you are never alone. There are still good men in this world. Arthur Jensen is one of them, a friend from my Army days, now the sharpest lawyer in Boston. He owes me a favor that never expires. His number is below. Trust him. He will know what to do." My late husband had left me a map, and now I finally had a destination. The next few days were a strange dance between two worlds. By day, I was simply a grandmother. Jennifer and Ben's business trip extended, their texts becoming shorter and more infrequent. I didn't mind. It gave me time with the children. We filled the cold, silent house with the scent of cinnamon and baked apples. We built forts out of pillows in the living room. I took them to my library, the real one, and let them run their small hands over the spines of 1,000 adventures. I watched the guarded, anxious look in their eyes slowly begin to fade, replaced by the simple, uncomplicated joy of being a child who feels safe. But it was in the garden, under the pale winter sun, that the first crack appeared in Jennifer's wall of lies. We were planting pansies, our hands deep in the cool, dark earth. Lily, my youngest granddaughter, looked up at me, her face smudged with dirt, her expression serious. "Grandma," she asked, her voice a small whisper, "why does Mommy say you don't love us?" The question landed like a physical blow. All the air left my lungs. How do you explain to a child that their mother uses love as a weapon and them as the ammunition? You don't. You can't. I put down my trowel. I knelt in the dirt so I could look her right in the eye. I gently wiped a smudge from her cheek. "Oh, sweet girl," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Your mom says a lot of things, but words are just words. Why don't we let my actions show you the truth?" She considered this for a moment, then gave me a small, solemn nod. That evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Your actions are very nice, Grandma." Some victories aren't won in a courtroom. The next afternoon, Jennifer called. Her voice was sharp, annoyed, a check-in that felt more like an interrogation. "I hope you're sticking to the schedule, Lorraine. And no junk food. The children need structure, not sentiment." I held the phone to my ear, my expression neutral. On the table in front of me, a small digital voice recorder was silently capturing every word. I had baited the hook. Now it was time to see if she would bite. "Everything is fine, Jennifer," I said calmly. "Lily and I had a little chat yesterday. She mentioned something you'd told her, about me not loving them. I'm sure it was just a simple misunderstanding. The silence on the other end of the line was electric. Then her voice returned, stripped of all its fake sweetness, leaving only cold, hard venom. "You listen to me," she hissed, her words low and dangerous. "You will not fill their heads with your sentimental nonsense. You are a babysitter, nothing more. Remember who decides if you ever see those children again. I can make one phone call and you will be a ghost to them. Do you understand me?" I looked at the small, blinking red light on the recorder. "Yes, Jennifer," I said. "I understand perfectly." I ended the call. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. Some people hand you the rope to hang them with. That evening, after the children were asleep, their dreams hopefully filled with stories and cookies, instead of fear and confusion, I returned to my library. The laptop held the digital evidence, the finances, the affair, the divorce plot. The recorder held the emotional proof, the threat, the cruelty, the admission of her power games. I had everything I needed. I picked up my husband's diary, my fingers tracing the phone number he had left for me all those years ago. My hand was steady as I dialed. The phone rang twice before a man with a kind, firm voice answered. "Arthur Jensen speaking." "Mr. Jensen," I began, my own voice sounding strange to my ears. "My name is Lorraine Miller. My late husband was Richard Miller. He said I should call you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a moment of respectful silence. Then he spoke, and his words were the first breath of fresh air I'd had in a decade. "Lorraine," he said warmly, "it's good to finally hear from you. Richard always said you were the strongest person he knew." He paused again, then added, "I've been waiting for this call for a long time." Arthur Jensen was a man who moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and was no longer impressed by it. The stage for the final act was set not in my cozy library, but in the cold, cavernous living room of my son's house. I insisted on it. A story should always end where it began. I arrived an hour early and sat in a sleek, uncomfortable armchair, a silent observer. Arthur sat opposite me, his leather briefcase resting by his feet. On the gleaming glass coffee table between us, he had arranged 3 simple manila folders. They looked innocuous. They were not. Ben was already there when I arrived, summoned by Jennifer for what she called a family meeting. He looked pale and confused, his eyes darting from me to the stranger in the suit. We didn't wait long. The sound of a key in the front door was unnaturally loud. Jennifer swept in, flushed and triumphant from her trip, her arms laden with shopping bags. She was laughing at something on her phone. "Ben, darling, you won't believe..." Her voice trailed off. Her eyes landed on Arthur Jensen. The brilliant smile on her face didn't fall. It froze, a brittle mask of joy. Her gaze flickered from the stranger to her husband's terrified face, and finally to me, in my armchair, watching. "What is this?" she demanded, dropping her bags. "Ben, what is your mother doing here?" Arthur spoke before anyone else could, his voice calm and level. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller. We are here to discuss a series of unauthorized financial transactions." He opened the first folder without ceremony. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stated facts, wire transfers, offshore accounts, a second mortgage. Jennifer's face went from confusion to indignant rage. "This is insane! I don't handle the finances. Ben does. Tell them, Ben." Ben just stared at the papers, speechless. Arthur calmly slid a glossy photograph across the table. It was a close-up of a wrist, adorned with a diamond tennis bracelet. "Perhaps you recognize this purchase, Mrs. Miller." Her carefully constructed composure finally shattered. She turned on Ben, her voice rising to a shrill cry. "You spied on me." Before Ben could answer, I spoke for the first time, my voice quiet but clear. "Ben didn't spy on you, Jennifer." I paused. "You told on yourself." I nodded to Arthur. He pressed a button on a small digital player, and Jennifer's own voice filled the room, cold and venomous. "You are a babysitter, nothing more. Remember who decides if you ever see those children again." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. She was cornered, trapped by her own words. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. She collapsed onto the sofa, her face dissolving into theatrical tears. "I did it for my children," she sobbed, "to protect them from this toxic family. The truth has its own voice." And just then, the living room door opened. Lily stood there, holding the teddy bear I had sewn for her, its button eyes now perfectly stitched back in place. She walked slowly, past her sobbing mother, and stood before me. She held the bear out. "Mommy," she said, her voice small but clear, "Grandma didn't say bad things. She just wanted you to stop." The simple, innocent words were the final blow. Jennifer's performance stopped. Her sobs became ragged, ugly gasps of genuine defeat. She looked at her daughter, at the mended bear, at the wreckage of her lies, and for the first time, she had nothing left to say. She stood up. She walked out. She closed the door. The sound of her car roaring away was the only sound for a long moment. Ben hadn't moved. He stared at the empty space where his wife had been. He looked from the folders on the table to his daughter, and finally, his eyes met mine. The fog that had clouded them for years finally cleared. He walked. He knelt. He broke. The only sound left in the world was my son's crying. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I simply rested my hand on my son's head, my fingers sinking into the hair I hadn't touched in years. The sound of his crying was the sound of a decade of lies washing away, leaving behind something clean, something real. He eventually looked up, his eyes red but clear for the first time. I helped him to his feet. He pulled me into a hug, a desperate anchoring embrace that said everything he couldn't. In that moment, for the first time in a very long time, my son was home. My victory wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was the quiet sound of a page turning. The seasons changed, and with them, so did we. I didn't win by destroying her. I won by rebuilding what she had tried to burn down. My small, quiet library is no longer just my sanctuary. It is now a reading circle for the children in my neighborhood, a place where stories are shared and imaginations are set free. Revenge is a chapter. Family is the whole book. Some afternoons, Ben brings the children. My grandchildren are gathered at my feet, their faces bright with wonder. My son sits beside them, his voice calm and steady as he reads aloud from a classic adventure, and I, the retired librarian, simply listen. I watch them, whole and healing, and I know the story isn't over. It's just beginning. Truth doesn't scream. It waits to be heard. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me and hearing my story. If it touched your heart, I hope you'll subscribe for more, and I would be truly honored to read a piece of your own family story in the comments below.